Welcome to the Restless Creatives podcast. Comfortable chats with inspirational creatives. Hosted by three self-confessed restless creatives, Lucy Hunter, Fiona Pickles and Bridget Girling. Today you find us chatting with Thordis Fridriksson, a wonderful BBC broadcaster who also has an array of amazing passions, which include knitting, horse riding and gardening. She even brings us a little bit of show and tell. Hello! Oh. How are you?
That's a very dramatic entrance.
Good. How are you? Really good. Could you hear us in the background?
No, for some reason, I clicked on the link a little. I was like, right, I'm gonna get there. I'm in my place next to a radiator, so I'm really warm.
I'm wrapped up in a blanket.
We've got the fire on. Yeah, this is like my most presentable corner by a window. So this is how I like to sit. But it is right next to a radiator, and it was so cold this morning, so we turned the heating on. But now I'm really regretting it.
I know I might start to unwrap. Right, let me introduce you, because I don't think you've met my friends before, have you? So, Thordis. Fiona's up the top there. I think she might be up the top there for you. It's hard to know whether you're seeing the same screen I am. And then
Fiona's down there for me.
Oh, who's down? Yeah. Fiona's down there, is she? Oh, right. Okay, so then Lucy's up there. Lucy's there. Oh well, you seem to have got the measure of us all anyway.
Nice to meet you.
Yes, lovely.
Well, thank you for inviting me along. This is very unusual for me. I'm always on the other side. Everything I do, I'm just sit there and expect other people to be interesting. So
the pressure's on.
Is on you now.
The spotlight is on you.
Yeah, I'm a bit perturbed by that.
Well, no, because the spotlight's on us as well, because she actually knows what she's doing. So she'll be
exactly.
I wouldn't do it like that.
Pro. Yeah. No, I really don't. Honestly.
Well, actually, having said you're the pro, I better introduce you so that everybody knows who you are. So, Thordis Fridriksson, which I'm sure I've said wrong, but I'm hoping I've said right. And you are a bit of a... Is polymath too strong to say?
Yes, definitely.
I think it's true. Anyway, you are a BBC broadcaster. You have your own show on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire in the evenings, which you've been doing for quite some time, haven't you? We'll come to that. We've had some changes, haven't we? You are also horse obsessed, garden obsessed, knitting obsessed, a musician.
Wow.
A singer.
Oh,
my goodness.
And you've got an amazing following on YouTube with your Get Gardening Now. And you just started a podcast this year. See?
You're making me sound way more accomplished than I am.
well, I feel exhausted. I'm going to have to go and have a lie down.
I know, we think we've been busy doing this.
Well, first of all, let's clarify, I am not a musician. That is one that needs to be scratched off immediately. Like years ago, I used to be in choirs, and now I don't. And the other day, I think someone was playing the piano, I sang along, and I realized I just don't know anything about music anymore. Like that part of my brain has just jettisoned information. That's gone. I don't think I can even read a key signature anymore. I certainly couldn't sight read anything, not that I was very good at that to begin with. And so yeah, I've occupied that part of my brain with some of the other things.
But you do have a degree in it.
Oh, good Lord, don't tell people that. No stuff.
You only have to tell people you've got a degree in it. They won't ask you anything else.
Yeah, they'll just be astounded.
I definitely was the one at university who just sort of sat in the corner and hoped no one would ask me anything, because it was all kind of somewhere up there, really. I loved music. I always will love music. But turns out that the academic side of music isn't really my forte. So degree wasn't necessarily the best idea.
It's quite often the way, isn't it? You love something, but when you study it too hard, it's a bit...
Yeah. That was definitely...
Now, what I want to know is, about your Icelandic roots, because your name sort of gives you away, doesn't it?
Yeah, except everyone thinks I'm going to be a man. And anybody who tuned into this podcast and thought Thordis Fridriksson, well, I don't know about the Thordis part, but Fridriksson, definitely going to be a guy. But I should be, well, I can't even say it, but I should be Ulriksdottir because I'm a daughter, clearly, not a son at all. But my dad was Fridrik's son, and so we're just fully anglicised. And I'm really woeful at Icelandic stuff. I haven't read a saga. I can't speak Icelandic, which are the people at university who are studying Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic would meet me and be like, yes, let's study our Old Norse. Let's practice. No, don't do that. I barely even own any itchy Icelandic jumpers. So I'm really badly qualified on that front.
Have you ever actually been to Iceland?
Yes, I have, but I haven't seen anything exciting. If you're related to Icelandic people, you just go to wedding recepes or funerals. You don't go to a geyser or see the Northern Lights or go whale watching. You go and sit in a normal house in a suburb, and everyone talks English because everyone can speak English, obviously. And so it's all very unglamorous. The closest thing I have to being kind of really linked to Iceland is my parents have an Icelandic horse, which came from Iceland. Oh. And she's called Matilda, and she is very opinionated, and we call her Matilda Beast.
She sounds a lot less Icelandic than you do. Matilda.
I know. Well, we got to name her. My mum had already used up the only Icelandic name she really liked on me. So,
okay. But I think it's quite interesting because Thordis Fridriksson is loosely translated into Thunder Fairy, which is where you are on Instagram.
Yeah, so when I went to get my first Twitter, which was a long time ago, I joined Twitter right at the forefront, not because I'm massively technically proficient, but because I had a friend who was really into tech and said, Twitter's going to be big, join it. So I did as I was told, rare. And it turned out somebody already had @Thordis. I couldn't believe it. And somewhere along the line, somebody had once said, oh, your name kind of translates into Thunder Fairy. And I thought, well, if I can't be Thordis, I want something unusual that will stand out. So I went for Thunder Fairy, and then my someone I worked with back when I worked for Radio Norfolk, my kind of radio husband as he was, he started calling me Thunder Fairy on air because it was my Twitter handle. And so I've actually got thunderfairy@bbc.co.uk as a genuine legitimate email address, which is a good job because let's face it, people trying to email Thordis.Fridriksson,
you're never get it right.
Not happening.
No, that would be a disaster. One letter wrong and you're doomed.
Yeah. I kind of felt, though, if people got an email through to that address, they really deserved a reply.
Yeah, they really did. In fact, they deserved to be in constant contact with you. So how did you go from your music degree, which we're not allowed to talk about?
No more, that's it. Line drawn under.
Yeah, straight under that. Into radio. Is this something that you always wanted to do? I mean, tell us about your journey. How did this all happen?
This is so weird talking about me. But what has probably become immediately clear, and Fiona and Lucy are like, why have we even turned up? There is no time to talk here because this person never stops talking. So I suppose somewhere along the line, the fact that I talked so much sort of made me feel like maybe I should go into some sort of media thing. But I'm not one of these radio presenters who spent my whole life wanting to be a radio presenter. So my other half, who is a radio presenter, he would, make little radio shows when he was a kid. He'd be like taping songs off the radio and talking in the gaps and things like that. Never occurred to me that I could be a radio presenter. But when I left university, a community radio station started up in Norwich, where I was living with my parents, in that sort of weird no man's land of I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have a music degree and I wasn't even good at it. So I went along to sort of, they at that point, because it was new, they were running these brilliant training courses, partly to figure out who was committed enough to keep going every Monday night for like 8 weeks. And I was still there on the 8th week. And so I was literally, you know, it was a tiny radio station in a porter cabin, and I would turn up and sort of look after the guests on their mid-morning program and make lots of tea, and then gradually I would be able to sort of do a report for their arts program or cover present the morning show, and I got little bits and bobs. And from working there, I got work experience at BBC Radio Norfolk, where I'd applied for work experience but had not got it, had not been successful. But I used the back door, and I kind of went from community radio into local radio. But then it's an epic scrabble. I look back now and it kind of feels like it happened quite quickly, but it was years. You know, it was a period of, you know, I was just answering phones like a couple of hours a week. I got a contract for 2 hours answering the phones at Radio Norfolk, and I was over the moon. And I got a pass, and I got my Thordis Fridriksson email address that no one could email to. And it was so exciting. And then it was just a case of getting an extra couple of hours here and covering this person for a week. And then I finally got a part-time job, and then I finally got some maternity cover and became full-time. And yeah, I was always behind the scenes, and then I started to get little bits of cover presenting. So it was a long period really of sort of gradually working my way, wheedling my way into the studio to be behind the microphone rather than just behind the scenes. But it's not even like I necessarily went into it thinking I'd be good at the presenting. I just kind of wanted a media-ish job because it felt like that was what I was drawn to. That's a very long answer. It could have been a lot easier.
I was just going to point out, I think Lily's behind you. Did we just see her tail?
Oh, Lily. Lily? She's never going to come on my lap if I ask her. Do you want to come say hello? No.
What is Lily?
She's just looking. No, she's marched off. She will present herself. I set all this up, and I went upstairs to put some lippy on, came back downstairs, and Lily was just sitting here, in the castle. I'm ready for my podcast. But now she won't join in. She'll come over at some point.
I was going to say, I think when people look at where people are in their career, people just think, oh, you're so lucky, that's amazing, how did you, and they don't understand the grind and the hard work and the determination and the grit and
the journey.
Everybody has to really serve their time, don't they? People think there's an easy way into things, and there just isn't.
I mean, I think because it's so big shake from Lily over there. It's so like front and center. All the stories you hear about, probably because they are unusual, are like the girls who got spotted in an airport and became a model and then got offered loads of television presenting or something. Well, I mean, that wasn't going to happen to me. And also, I mean, I'm glad it didn't. I think, come on then, are you gonna come up? Or are you just going to stand there?
I was trying to work out, is Lily a dog? Is Lily a cat?
She's not a child. She's my hairy child.
She could have been a pony. It wouldn't surprise me if Thordis had a pony.
No, I would have a pony in the house. My other half
Shetland
wouldn't,
pony
but I
on
would.
your knee.
No, I think for most people I look at, they've had this journey, and actually a lot of us needed it.
We're all very distracted now because you can
Sorry,
just see.
Hello.
Really? Is that as close as you're going to get? Do
Cute.
you want to come and say hello? You're just being a monkey, aren't you? Do you want to come over? Come over? You're just going to belch. Well, there we go.
Lovely.
We'll just keep her in shot. She can do what she
absolutely.
wants. But yeah, I absolutely needed that time. I think, although I kind of, a part of me, the show-off side of me wanted to be behind the microphone, it took a long time to get the confidence to think I had anything worthwhile saying. And let's be honest, there are plenty of days when I don't. Like, there are days when you come off air and you think, what was all that nonsense?
But it's such a skill, isn't it? And I really admire that, because I'm not, this is slightly ironic in that we're doing a podcast, but I'm not naturally someone who can talk that much and feel it. You know, I'm much more of a sort of listener. And I really admire people who can do that, because it isn't utter skill to just off the top of your head, when something's gone wrong or there's nothing there, to just be able to speak and be interesting.
Yeah, and at least when you're just speaking, Thordis has to push buttons and things.
Exactly.
There's other stuff going on.
I think that's the weirdest thing, is I actually really like the desk driving side of it. I'm quite a control freak about that. I don't mind being a sidekick and kind of co-presenting and not being in control of the buttons, but it's a very different experience, particularly with music. I like to be able to sort of hit the intro and all these really weird, geeky, nerdy radio things that no listener really cares about. The talking and listening thing, though, I think the hardest thing is that actually to be the kind of radio presenter I like to be, I do quite a lot of talking to myself, you know, in the studio, late at night, there's nobody. You kind of have to just hope that there are people out there, because you've got one production person and you're just talking to yourself and you're sharing some anecdote from your day and you're thinking, I'm not even sure this is interesting. That side of it, I think that's the hardest thing about radio presenting. But what I really like is interviewing people, which is difficult because you have to both talk and listen. And it's so easy to not listen properly.
Yes.
There are so many times I've gone back and edited an interview and you think, I didn't even notice them say that. It would have been great to pick up on that and take that further. But it's amazing how your brain just starts to think about your next question or think about something they've said. It's really hard. I think actually being a good listener is absolutely vital, and more of us could do with having more of that skill.
No, absolutely.
Well, I'm rather hoping with the three of us doing this going forward, one of us at least will be listening.
And the other ones are pushing the buttons.
I'm super impressed because our podcast, if you ever listen to it, you'll notice there's quite a lot of talking over. It's inevitable, I think. Once you get lots of people talking about something they love, you just get everybody wanting to chip in at the same time. So I am super impressed that you are not all talking over each other all the time.
It's early days.
Weeks and we'll be like,
We're also a bit rabbit in headlights like this.
So what are we doing?
What's my name? Who am I?
But you've had quite an interesting year. Well, that's a good word to use it, because your whole way of working has completely changed as a result of this pandemic, hasn't it?
And not, I mean, I'm really lucky, and not all in a bad way. There have been bad things. I think a lot of people have lost work or lost money, had upheaval. It's obviously there have been lots of downsides, but I'm really lucky. You know, the main part of my job I have kept. It's changed. I was supposed to be doing a drive show, but local radio changed all their schedules and I ended up in the evening, which has definitely got its positives. I never really wanted to be an evening presenter, if I'm honest, but I enjoy it, and I've been able to experiment with different things. So we have like a little production, so local writers are submitting material and then we turn into sort of little soundscaped, they're not radio plays, but kind of radio productions. Really enjoy that. I've been able to do longer form interviews than you might be able to do at other times of the day. So I've definitely enjoyed it. And actually, Bridget, as a good friend of mine, will know that I am actually, despite seeming so loud, actually basically a hermit. And so I love being at home with my dog and my other half, who's normally here, there and everywhere. He's a football presenter, a football reporter. So he's normally at away games and traveling a lot. And I see him, you know, a good amount, but I've seen him so much. So I've been able to be in my garden. I've done loads of knitting. So I have enjoyed the personal side of it way more than plenty of people whose, you know, favorite thing to do is go to the theatre or something. I'm really lucky. Work-wise, things have changed. And I suppose one of my coping mechanisms has been to start a podcast, which is quite an unusual coping mechanism, but clearly one you've all been drawn to as well.
Yes. Well, we decided to embrace that too. How did you come up with the idea? Because, I mean, we'd been chatting throughout the whole of the year just like this anyway. And it was Lucy that suddenly said, oh, we should turn this into a podcast. And we all chuckled and went, yeah, let's do it. And
that was
suddenly
2 weeks ago.
No, it was 4 weeks ago.
Was it 4 weeks ago?
It was New Year's Day.
Was
when we were
it?
speaking on New Year's Day.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So
I'm very
the madness
impressed.
sets in. But how did you decide to do it?
Well, it was, when I say it was a coping mechanism, it was partly because I now live in Cambridge, and Alan, who I present the show with, or the podcast with, he lives right on the east coast of Norfolk. So he's right over there in East Ruston, at East Ruston Old Vicarage, which, if you haven't been, is just the most amazing, inspiring garden. And it's one of my happy places. And about 6 years ago, we started the Get Gardening YouTube channel, just because we did the radio together, we did a gardening radio show, and gardening on the radio is actually quite successful. I mean, look at Gardener's Question Time on Radio 4. But there are lots of things you think it would be really nice to demonstrate them. And Alan, and also our Get Gardening co-conspirator Ian Roof, who works a lot at East Ruston Old Vicarage and kind of manages the garden there, they know so much, like the tips, the keys to being able to propagate stuff and take cuttings and sow and collect seed, and also just talk about plants and kind of recommend plants and explain stuff. I wanted to be able to kind of capture some of that. And it was never interlinked with our BBC show because that's just too much bureaucracy and complicated stuff. So it always sat as its own separate thing. But then, like with the pandemic, I just couldn't see him, and we'd stopped working together as a result of COVID. So I was so worried that I wasn't going to be able to stay in touch with him. And I know that we could have just like talked on the phone every week, but we're both really busy. And I also wanted to talk to him about gardening. So it just became this vehicle for making sure that on a weekly-ish basis, sometimes, twice in 1 week, sometimes there'll be a bit of a gap, but basically we are sort of every week sitting down to talk about plants for an hour. And that somehow snowballed into not only us talking about plants, but inviting along other people. And first of all, they were members of our radio show. So we used to do the garden party. We had a rolling panel of all these brilliant people, including Bridget. So we started off, Bridget was, apart from Ian, you were our first guest. And then we had other members of the panel. But then we started to think, well, we're no longer restricted to Norfolk and the kind of bordering areas. We can talk to anybody. So between us, we would be like, let's talk to Ben Preston at York Gate. Let's talk to Jimmy Blake at Huntingbrook outside Dublin. Let's talk to Bunny Guinness and Matthew Wilson and all these people. And because they, A, love Alan, let's be honest, and B, they are kind of keen for any opportunity to sit down and talk about plants with a plantsman like Alan. Actually, they're quite enthusiastic about spending an hour talking about plants. So it's been great because there are just so many people that we sort of fire off an email or send a tweet and they're like, yeah, all right. So we sit down on Zoom and we talk about plants, and then I have the job of editing it.
Yes, Bridget's got that job.
Bridget's job.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if she delegates some of that at some point.
No, we've had this discussion.
Yes, why did I put my hand up for that?
Just be grateful that your guests aren't kind of reeling off various plants you've never. I mean, it's a great education for me, the amount of plants people who come on and they start talking about Daphnophyllums and all these plants. I just don't even know how to spell it, and I'm there on Google like, what was that? Typing spellings in and hoping Google says, did you mean?
Yes, that's exactly it.
So there's a lot of research, but then the educational side of it from a real just personal interest side is brilliant, because I have learned so many plants over the last 6 months or so that I just would never have heard of, because I'd go and see them. I mean, actually Alan grows most of them, but you walk through a garden, if you aren't with someone to point them out and you don't know them, you don't always remember to go and look it up, and even if you did, you might not be able to find it. So it's great to have them sort of showing leaves, and we always ask for show and tell. And we also always ask for FLOMO, which is my favorite thing, which is basically that kind of FOMO you get about plants. So if you see something in someone's garden or a magazine or Instagram and you really want to grow it, but you don't have it yet, that's FLOMO. And I live my life in a constant state of FLOMO.
Oh,
That's brilliant.
And because so many of the gardeners, they're exactly the same. There are always, I mean, at the moment we're right in the middle of snowdrop season, and I know, Bridget, you've been partaking in a little bit of galanthophile mania, galanthomania.
Galanthophilia.
Yeah. Which galanthophilia somehow sounds wrong. So
It
does sound very wrong.
So yeah, there's a lot of snowdrop coveting going on the podcast at the minute. So yeah, we just introduce these elements, and it kind of, I don't know, these things just evolve. It's magical, actually, how they just develop in their own, they kind of find their own route and they just go off and grow in that direction.
Bit like our careers.
Yes.
Yes.
So where did your love of gardening come from? I mean, was your childhood, was it immersed in the garden, or is this just something that's suddenly swept you off your feet?
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say my mum had an above average interest in gardening, but we didn't have a huge amount of money growing up. So I remember her doing a lot of like, taking cuttings off her hebe, and we had a lot of hebes and a lot of lavenders because she'd sort
You're
of
good at that.
Spread things around.
take what she had and make more of them.
Yeah.
And I remember really happy times in the garden, and I do remember being very happy, very pleased with myself when I realized that I knew the Latin name for lavender. I was like 5 and it's like, it's lavandula. I remember being very excited about it, but then there was quite a gap. I'm not actually very good at gardening. I would say I'm plant obsessed and I'm quite flower obsessed. But I don't seem to have any natural green finger or thumb or anything. Like, these are not green. So I just keep trying and keep working at the practical side of it. And I am getting better. I think part of it is I've only had my own garden for a couple of years. So I gardened with my mum in her garden, and then I'd have like patios and things. But it's only now I've finally got a house that I'm able to really sort of work at the practical side of it. So I think it came from a family who were big into nature and plants. And the real pivotal moment came when I talked about my career and I started out just answering the phones. The show I started on was The Garden Party on BBC Radio Norfolk. So my contract was answering the phone for 2 hours. And obviously everyone would phone in with like questions about plants I had never heard of, and I had no idea how to spell muscari or any of these things. So I'd be scribbling, and then the gardeners would be talking about things, and I'd be putting them into Google and trying to figure out what they were talking about, and I'd just be hit by Google image searches of these amazing trees and shrubs and flowers. And then one day I went to the garden centre with my mum because the neighbours had put in a fence and it was just a complete blank fence and it looked really ugly. So we said, we'll go and we'll buy some plants to cover the fence. And I just stood in the middle of a garden centre surrounded by all these plants, and it just felt like it all came together at that moment. All of these searches I'd done and all these hours I'd spent listening to the gardeners talk about plants, I was suddenly surrounded by all these plants, and I didn't know them obviously, but I felt this kind of affinity. And I felt it all lock into place. And that was probably the first step up the ladder, which has kind of accelerated and become more of an obsession as the years have gone on.
So would you say that your gardening that you actually do, would you say that's kind of, if you don't think you have green fingers, presumably it's just almost like your therapy, your happy place, your place where you can just go and relax and be, and the results aren't everything, it's just the process of doing.
I'm never really, it's one of my New Year's resolutions to be more pleased with what I do in the garden. I am never happy with really much. I can get happy with individual plants, but I'm really bad at sort of laying it all out. And you end up like anybody in a small garden, modern house or whatever, you come up against practical problems. So there'll be loads of people who their children want to play football. I don't have that problem, but I do have a small cockapoo who wants to dig holes and jump on all the plants and destroy
Lucy
everything.
Understands this.
So you end up having to sort of garden within a lot of parameters. And I just, I think you kid yourself. I feel like if I had a big garden, I'd be able to make it a triumph. I don't think that's the case, but it is a way of escaping. And I absolutely love growing things from seed. It's the biggest woe of my current life, I think, that I don't have a fantastic greenhouse. I would love, Alan Gray at East Ruston has these amazing propagating, they're not glamorous, but these little propagating greenhouses which have heated benches, and they're kind of tucked around the back. So, this doesn't have to be on show. You can just shove all your cuttings and stuff in there and let them get on with it. And it's got misting benches.
Oh gosh.
Stuff of dreams. And that's like one day, every time I'm in there, I think one day I'm going to have something like this, just the optimum growing conditions, because I tend to grow things in my back bedroom in a little heated propagator.
Yeah, on the windowsill.
And then obviously it's the race to stop them going leggy, because anybody who grows stuff on a windowsill, they don't get enough light, they start reaching for the light, and then they fall over. So I'm always running stuff first thing in the morning when it's growing season. I'm sort of running these trays of seeds out into a little polytunnel in the middle of my lawn so they can get enough light during the day in the protection. But then of course they're not getting enough wind, so then you have to make sure they're getting some sort of breeze blowing through them so their stems grow strong enough. So yeah, it's quite the battle, but I absolutely love growing stuff from seed. That's probably one of my favourite things about gardening. So every year I go through the same debacle. Last year I dropped all of my seedlings in the middle of the living room.
Ooh.
That wasn't successful.
No.
Just blame the dog.
Amazingly, I managed to pick lots of them up and they survived. So it does show that we treat seedlings like they're incredibly fragile, and when we should, they are. But they survived falling down the stairs. So, actually, they're quite resilient.
So I've got a tiny greenhouse, which is, we had a shed existed and we just sort of built sort of the same shape on the other side, to make a little mini greenhouse, which is filled with all the geraniums, all the stuff that I've brought inside. So I've got very little room to actually do any propagating. So I was just saying to the girls before you came in, I've got a big tray of water which I plonk the seeds in, and it's frozen in the greenhouse. I was like, oh no. But I've actually got 2 trays of sweet peas in the spare bathroom on the heated floor.
Oh, that's cunning.
That is a really good idea.
And I'll tell you what else I'm going to do. I'll tell you, and this really is a bit of a stretch, but Charles Dowding is very, very much, do not harden off your seedlings. Literally, when they've come through, put them out. If they're hardy, obviously.
What, sort of treat them mean, keep them keen kind of
Yeah,
thing?
and I did
very mean.
I tried it with some Monarda Lombardo, which is the best in the world, and literally put this tiny little, literally just had its 2, almost like its first 2 leaves, put them out, and they grew into a massive, you sort of like recess it into a hole so it's got a little bit of protection. And that's going to be my way of modus operandi this year.
But you wouldn't do that in February, would you?
I think I did. I did.
Really?
I can't remember when it was. There was definitely frost at some point.
Well, I grew some zinnias, and I would do this sort of running back and forth thing. So this is a couple of seasons ago. I grew these zinnias and I had to go away for the weekend, in a time when we could do things like go away for the weekend.
Yes.
And I was like, I can't be indoors, because they were small enough that they were going to get all leggy within a weekend in the back bedroom. So I was like, well, they're just going to have to lump it in the cold frame. That's all I've got. So I put them in the cold frame, and I came back and they just looked really sad, and they were quite stunted for a while, but then they caught up, and Alan told me to chuck them. He just said, they're not going to make it, or they will, but they're just going to be they're going to be so affected by the trauma of their early life.
Traumatized seedlings.
You might as well just start again. But I hate throwing out seedlings.
I do.
So I just kept them, and actually I had a really good year. And I can't remember
you
what
told him.
Did. Well, yeah, I did. Oh,
Good.
I made
One
money
to me.
But I think I'm so worried once I've got something to germinate. I'm so worried to treat it mean. But it would make my life a lot easier. So maybe I will start doing that. Charles Dowding knows his stuff. It kind of came
from, it was from necessity. So I'd pricked out, which I absolutely hate, loads and loads of Monarda Lombarda. And I just thought, it's either throwing them, I know, it is the best. It's either throwing them or testing them. And it worked. It absolutely worked. So I'm actually going to do it with some sweet peas. I'm going to try it.
Well, you don't have to put them all out, do you? You could say, well,
no,
I'll put half of them out and see what happens.
I might even put 4 out. So I've potted up some little pots at the weekend, and I'm probably going to just give it a go and see what happens.
Well, also at this point in the season, it's super early, so you actually could back your luck. You can do a few and then have another go.
I mean, they haven't even come through yet, so it'll probably be a few weeks. So it's probably going to be like early March before they go out. So it's not that scary, is it? Well, let's see.
We shall discuss your results.
Yes.
In June.
Yes. We're going to be so cross if Fiona's sporting
That'll be like
beautiful sweet peas way ahead of us.
Exactly. Yeah. We've got nothing at all.
They're never going to be ahead of you down there, right? I'm in cold Yorkshire.
They'll be ahead of us in wet Wales.
Yeah, don't forget our winds come straight from Russia.
Yes.
That's what my grandmother always used to say. Make sure you're wearing your vest. Those winds, they come from Russia.
No, I do think
you're
with
wearing
sweet
a vest.
peas.
Oh, sorry. Sweet peas.
As I say with sweet peas, I think we often think we need to start them really early. In the beginning of the first lockdown, I was like, oh, I've really been rubbish with my peas. I haven't started any sweet peas. So at the beginning of that lockdown, I sowed them outside, had the best year of sweet peas I've ever had. So I think sometimes, and one of our guests on the podcast, she done the same thing, and she figured that she had two sowings. So she had an early sowing, like a kind of December sowing, and a March sowing. And the March sowing seemed to cope better with drought and heat than the ones that had started earlier. Though
I
obviously
think you're just so desperate, aren't you? You're so desperate to do anything in January.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
That's why everyone needs to take up knitting.
Oh, now tell us about your knitting. Yes. Something I've always been really rubbish at.
Well, but this is the thing. So I have always been really bad at knitting. Now, I have got to accept now I'm not as bad as I was, but it's only because I have basically spent a year now knitting all the time. Alongside gardening and walking my dog, it's just been absolutely constant. And the proof of that is that I have now got all these jumpers and things that I made over
Have
the
you
course
brought some
of the
show and
pandemic.
tell?
Well, so this is...
You've not made that.
I think this is my most recent jumper.
To take commissions.
The really surprising thing is when they actually...
them.
This is very exciting. So this is brioche, which is it isn't hard to knit, but if you drop a stitch, you're screwed.
You say it's not hard to knit.
I'm sure it is.
That looks...
Well,
knit one, purl one's hard.
So
exactly.
I feel like knitters divided into different groups. I think there are the knitters who learned at their grandmother's knee and just have some amazing innate understanding of knitting, which I will never have. I've worked really hard. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos to sort of understand if I drop a stitch, exactly how to pick it up, and which is a lot less difficult than it sounds, by the way. It's actually quite easy to pick a stitch up, which is really handy because I drop them all the time, particularly when I put my knitting down and then I'm like, oh no, it's fallen off. I have a horrible tendency to knit while I'm doing things. So I'll knit while I'm editing a podcast or something, and then I'll put it down. Oh, I've got to do that. I'll put it down and then I'll look at it and be like, oh, just dropped stitches. So
knitting on your radio show, if you listen carefully, you can hear click, click, clack, clack.
That has happened.
You need a cork on the end of your needle.
That's what I need to. I mean, it's such a simple thing to fix, but I don't know why I don't do it. I mean, I have enough corks.
I was going to say, surely there's a supply of those.
But yeah, I'm not one of the. I did technically learn when I was little, but I just did that knitting when you're little, where you have a couple of those plasticky sort of children's knitting needles, and it's really tight, and you're picking up the wool, and you've got this really cumbersome way of knitting, and it's not very fun, and you can't even get your needle into the stitch because it's all so tight. So that was how I knitted when I was little, and clearly I was a bit sort of drawn to it because I put it down all the way through the rest of my childhood. At university, I wanted to knit again, so I started knitting, and I really enjoyed it, and I got a better way of knitting. But then I suppose life happened and I stopped again. So at that point I was only ever knitting scarves. And then I think it must have been how many years ago I was into crochet, and somebody bought me a knitting kit for something really simple, like a boot topper or something. And I had a go, and I kind of thought, I do like this. I'm still more of a crochet girl. And so I'd kind of crochet flowers and granny squares and, like granny blankety things. And then a friend started knitting socks. And there was something about knitting socks that I was just really drawn to, and it was really hard. They're not actually that hard. There's an amazing woman, Winwick Mum. If you look up Winwick Mum socks, she has a blog that makes it the easiest it could ever possibly be to knit a sock. But there are inevitably a couple of points that are a bit challenging. And I just, for whatever reason, I was determined. And also a lot of knitting a sock, like you can have little circular needles like this, and you just knit round and round. So it's basically you don't have to purl or faff about. A lot of it is just knitting. So it's great for the telly and train. It's very portable for train journeys. And I used to be on the train all the time. So I wanted something to occupy me. So yeah, I just became obsessed with knitting socks. And it was basically mostly socks for years until the pandemic. And then I thought, well, I'm going to be trapped at home, and I've got quite a lot of wool. And obviously you could order stuff online. So I thought, right, I'm going to knit a jumper. And I picked a pattern that was quite like thick weight. So I thought it would knit up quicker. And I discovered that actually knitting a jumper is not like, I mean, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's not as hard as I thought it was going to be, and it's not as hard as people think. There are a lot of really clever modern knitters who have exploited the like circular needles. So I knitted most of this, like it started here, I knitted it down, I held some stitches for the arms, and then you knit the body. You just go round and round and round and round, and it's just not as hard as I thought it was going to be.
Sounds quite hard to
You've
me.
made it sound simple. You're saying all the right things, and I'm still feeling like I'd never be able to produce something I could wear.
That had the same length.
I feel slightly anxious.
Well, I think that the problem is, the biggest problems with knitting are, you do have to do a lot, I think, to get good. So fortunately, I seem to be quite an obsessive person, as you listed at the beginning. I do tend to get quite big into things. And some things are more of a passing fancy, I suppose, but gardening, knitting, things like that, they're here for the long haul. So I've just done so much knitting, and I've watched so many YouTube videos. I mean, as we all know, YouTube is just the place if you want to learn how to do something, whether it's, a clematis cutting or how to do brioche knitting. And I feel like if you want to do it, it's not for everybody. I mean, there are loads of people who hate knitting and crochet, and they're probably brilliant, I don't know, embroidery or origami or something else. People, I feel like they have their craft, but for whatever reason, I just became obsessed with knitting, and I've watched a lot of videos, and I've spent probably hundreds, if not thousands of hours knitting, and you kind of inevitably get better, I suppose. Practice.
It is practice, isn't it? But you're doing some beautiful coloured work now as well, which is intricate colours all interwoven.
And that, so I feel like with knitting, with crochet, with anything, a lot of it is once you figure out how to hold the wool and hold the needles, and once you figure that out, the rest of it's fine. So I am obsessed with colours. You can't necessarily see that immediately. You can kind of slightly see it, but I am properly obsessed with colours. I mean, my curtains, they're a good demonstration of colour obsession.
Very nice.
And flowers. Colour and flowers.
But I found that when I'd look at knitting patterns, I always wanted to knit the ones that had lots of colours in them. So I thought, I've got to figure out how to hold two colours at once. I cannot hold more than two colours. I've discovered that really is next level hard. But actually, people have different methods. But for me, I'm what they call a thrower. So I knit by throwing the yarn like that with this hand. Continental knitters, they sort of pick it, they hold the yarn in the other hand. I'm not explaining this very well, I'm not a knitting tutor. Basically, you can hold a colour in each hand. So if you have one colour and then your kind of contrast colour in the other hand, it's, once you get into the rhythm of it, it's not as hard as it sounds at all. It's just about finding how it works for you, and everybody holds their yarn slightly differently. And then once I could do that, just the world opened up, and then I could do quite simple things. So like the top of this is complicated, but the rest of it, I'm never going to be able to show this, but it's kind of speckled. So it's just like 2 rows of plain knitting, and then a row where you do one in every 4 stitch with a contrast colour, so you get like little dots. And then there's more. I have got lots of things all over the place. Oh, I brought some socks. So this is wool.
Wow.
So this is absolutely Winwick Mum's simple things. So like you just rib your cuff. This is just round and round knitting, and then you do have a bit of a faff with the heel flap. But this is self-striping wool. So literally most of that
terms are blowing my mind.
I know.
Do you just do your ribbing at the top?
And the only faff is the heel.
But that, I mean, genuinely, that is totally achievable, because it's most of it is the wool. So this does its own thing. So I haven't done anything complicated. Like, that's just a really beautiful.
So you haven't had to have your 2 colours.
No. So this is a different colour.
It's a rainbow.
But
so that's a yarn.
Yeah. So
all of those colours in it.
That's all one ball of wool just doing its thing. More complicated is then.
Oh my goodness.
So that is contrasting colours, and this I never thought I was going to be able to do this, but it is just a beautiful pattern by, I think if you look up Ducathi, Ducathi, she does these from Germany. She does the most amazing patterns.
I love that they match your jumper as well.
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes.
So And that, I mean, they were hard. They were lockdown 1. That was a lot of lockdown 1.
How long did that take?
The problem is
by the sounds of it.
She's still finishing the other one.
Several weeks of a lot of knitting. But I mean, people can knit really quick. I think it just depends how much time you do the knitting. And then this was, I think this is the second jumper I did, which again, like most of this is just normal, just knitting round and round. But then it had like a little yoke. So this is the amazing Andrea Mowry, who's a phenomenal knitwear designer. This is called Pink Velvet, this design. And it's just, and I did it with a speckled yarn. So this is the other thing. If you get into knitting, you'll just spend all of your money on yarn. So imagine how poor I am, plants and yarn.
Yes,
oh my goodness.
So yeah, indie dyed yarn is another thing. So then of course I can't wear any of these things like around my dog because she'll pluck them. But the most, oh yeah, here's my,
you need to knit something for the dog.
Yes.
I should. This went horribly wrong. I can barely wear this because I basically made a massive mistake around the neck and the shoulders, which means I think it's going to fall apart. But I like the colours.
Can't get it over your head.
It's amazing.
And my current one is this incredibly crazy shawl I'm attempting to knit, which is still attached to all its wool. Where I've basically used all of my colours.
You've used all the colours there, haven't you? All the colours, all the patterns.
So that's an entirely crazy. That's the
amazing.
Bubbles and Brioche shawl by Stephen West, who is another amazing knit. There are so many amazing knitwear designers, and once you get sucked into it, you just want to try all the patterns. So
do you find that you have to completely concentrate when you're doing it, or is it something now that, like driving a car, so you can sort of do it in the background and your brain, that allows your brain to then go off and think about other things?
So this is where knitting is good, because I think like something like not knitting, sock knitting is good, because if you were to do like this bit, I wouldn't have to concentrate on, so that'd be great for a bit of Netflix. And then I might have to stop everything for this part, but then the rest of this you can basically, television or podcast or whatever it up. And some parts, like the great thing about something like this I discovered is like the bubble stitch, so much knitting, it's so clever that it's only like every fourth or whatever row that it gets complicated. Most of that is just plain knitting, so you're just knitting, and then you have to do the little drop stitch thing to create the bubble. But lots of it looks more complicated than it is. I think that's my big thing. It's a bit like gardening, actually. If you know how to,
if you're passionate about something, you learn it, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. And and I am just very passionate about lots of things.
So I'm one of these that like starts something and then halfway through it's like, I'm not sure I really like that. And so when I was going through Mum's stuff, there was all sorts of bags of half-knitted jumpers with the needles still in from when I was like a teenager, and half-made patterns of jackets and trousers and things that I'd obviously started, thought this is a really good idea, and then something more interesting happened somewhere else and I moved on. I think that's what I'd be like with knitting, unfortunately.
I can't sew. I have tried so hard, and I have a sewing machine, but it never comes out. I think, again, I feel like if I had a craft room, and I had the sewing machine and the space, then maybe I would. But I actually my brain doesn't compute sewing and patterns and things very well. I would love to be able to make dresses and things like that. Maybe one day I'll get obsessed with that. And I start all kinds of things. I've got, this blanket isn't finished. This one here, it's even got some ends hanging off it. I was just need to deal with that. And embroidery, I would love to do lots of embroidery. And I've got projects I've started that are just in that cupboard and will maybe never get finished. But you can only do so much, and you guys are so accomplished at so many things. You can't do everything.
No,
very narrow accomplishments here.
Well, you've just started a podcast. That's a big accomplishment.
Yes. It's quite interesting to kind of think, is this a creative thing to do? But actually, I think it is. I mean, we've had to, as you know, we've had to pull all sorts of strands together to make this work. And we're lucky because we can share the jobs up between us. But you're kind of holding the fort with your podcast, aren't you? I mean, you're doing your daily job plus your podcast and all this knitting. Do not be seed sewing.
I think it does appeal to a certain OCD part of my nature. I'm quite un-OCD about lots of things other people are OCD about, but I think I'm a bit control freakish about it's great, the podcast, the way things divide out is Alan doesn't really want to sort of impose his creative will on most of it. So I just do what I want, really. I don't have to run my edits past anybody. And then when I was talking about being on in the evenings, there's a similar thing where I have presented the breakfast show, not for very long, for about 8 months, and alongside hating a 4:30 alarm call, you inevitably become, even if you're the presenter, you are a cog in a much bigger machine, because it's the breakfast show and there are lots of people reporting on stories and setting up guests, and you can't, unless you're Chris Evans, you're not really imposing your will on that programme. And I quite like to impose my will.
I guess you've been a little less managed over the last few months, which must be rather lovely, because you've had to do your own editing for your own show in the evening, haven't you?
Yeah, and I love editing. I think that's the other great thing when it comes to me sort of doing the podcast as well, is I do really like editing. And my normal day job, obviously all radio, there's not really any video involved with that. And our podcast, similar to yours, there's that kind of the video, audio, there's different things to manage. And most of my editing normally, professionally, has always been audio. And one of the reasons we started the Get Gardening YouTube channel in the first place was so I could acquire this extra skill, because I knew I wasn't just going to sit there editing video for the fun of it. I knew I had to have an end goal. And it's not, to edit and to make video really well is a huge skill. To turn out perfectly usable, simple video is well within everybody's grasp. So I kind of learned how to do that.
No pressure, Bridge.
I know you can already do it. So you're at the like turning out beautiful. You turn out beautiful stuff. I have never turned out a beautiful video in my life, but I have been able to work out how to make videos, and yeah, I suppose it's quite good for me because I am a bit of a perfectionist, and the knitting is good for this as well, because every knitting project has loads of things wrong with it, and I've just had to get comfortable with that. And it's the same with the podcast. In an ideal world, the podcast would just be an array of absolutely exquisite images and every plant name on the screen, and I just can't always do that. The world of Instagram is wonderful. So many super generous plant people have donated photos for us to use for the podcast. So I've got lots of great photos, but I would love to have a catalogue of my own pictures. I have quite a lot of pictures, but I haven't organised them very well, so it's quite hard to find. If I need some specific plant, I don't always manage to track it down in time. But yeah, you just have to sort of go, right, well, this is what I want to achieve, but this is what I can achieve, and this is what's attainable, and I've got to be happy with that.
Yeah, I think we're probably the same, aren't we? I think, and one of my friends says, good enough is enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. If it's good enough, then it's fine. But we've divided up the tasks almost organically, really. We've never sort of said, right, you do that and you do that, and it's kind of worked quite well, hasn't it? That we've all done different things and.
But I am glad we have got the three of us to share it. I think it does all rest and fall on your shoulders, Thordis. I remember you saying to me, could you get photos to me? And I was thinking, the pressure, I've got to get her photos. Cool. She's got to get this done. And then I got them to you and you went, that was really quick. Nobody ever gets them to me that quickly.
No, you and Jane Ann Walton, who's another, if you love plants, at Jane_Ann_Walton is a wonderful one to follow. She just grows such amazing things. And she came on the podcast, and she and you are like my favourite guests ever for sending over
Sorry
photos.
To all the other guests.
Yeah. in the category of making my life as easy as possible, sending over, also Bridget, you are my favourite, but sending over photos.
Says that to everybody.
Like just beautiful photos. Everybody knows Bridget takes exquisite photos. So to be able to send
have you
over...
looked at Lucy's and Fiona?
Okay, I'm now in the company of just a whole trio of amazing photographers, which is definitely not my lead skill. But yeah, it is epic. And also, a lot of the time, our guests don't necessarily have the photos. I mean, we might talk about things that aren't remotely doing their thing. I mean, it might be a completely naked plant at the moment, but we're talking about it when it's festooned in flowers. So I basically make a big list of all the plants, and then I go off trying to find bloggers and Instagrammers and stuff who'll let me use their pictures. And I don't manage to find all of them. I won't obviously use anything without permission. So sometimes someone will get back to me a month later and say, oh yeah, you can use the photo. I'm like, oh, a bit late now. Thanks. Fortunately, they never know, because obviously most of them don't go and check to see if their photo made it. But yeah, it is quite the process. But I think, I don't know, I think it makes me learn the plants better. I mean, now I can't think of any of the plants, obviously, off the top of my head. I can't think of any of the things I've learned, but actually having to sort of edit it. And I edit the audio version. So I edit the video version, and then I edit the audio version a little bit more to change it, and like take out the stuff that doesn't work for an audio version. And so I'm listening to these plant names over and over, and I'm writing them, and I'm searching for them, and I'm copying and pasting left, right, and centre. So it definitely helps you to sort of absorb more information.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think it's time to do the... I've got to try and remember what we've got a hashtag for it. What do we call it?
TLC 5.
Yeah.
No
TLC
fun.
5.
We took the fun out.
Yeah, we took the fun out of our hashtag.
Sounded like a Teletubby show.
Yeah, Andy Pandy. So, are you ready for this, Thordis? I didn't. Oh, I've brought my screen up and it's covered your face. Let me squash it up. Here we go. So, we've got 5 daft questions to ask you. You can expand or just be quick fire. It's up to you.
Well, have you been here for the last like 40 minutes?
Okay, don't expand too much. Yeah, we're running out of time.
Quick expansion.
I'm going to ask you one that we asked last week. I won't say who we asked, but it revealed an interesting answer.
Uh-oh.
Are you ready for this? Can you dance?
Not very well. I'm very enthusiastic. Like on a wedding dance floor, I want to dance a lot, but it involves a lot of like bouncing and not a lot of grace.
I like that.
Dancing.
Bouncing. I think there's a lot to be said for enthusiasm.
Yes, I'm with you there.
I
Kids our age.
Now, what is the place that if you could be anywhere right now that you would be? Or where is the place? Where would you be right now if you could be anywhere?
I mean, the really like overly emotional answer is probably in my parents' house.
Oh.
As I'm sure loads of people, feel that way. But if it was a normal time and I was just in Cambridge and, we weren't all severed from our loved ones by a pandemic, it would probably would be somewhere like East Ruston Old Vicarage. It's always, there have been so many days when I've had like a really rubbish morning at work or something and I've gone out to film with Alan and it's just such a magical, it's like 32 acres of just inspiring, immersive, planty wonder. So yeah, somewhere like that, it's magic.
Isn't it wonderful when you have somewhere like that that's just your place? Right, what did you have for supper last night?
Oh, good Lord, what did I have? Oh, we were so naughty. We were naughty, but within extreme confines, because we were sitting on the sofa and we'd had quite, like, it wasn't a very eventful Sunday and there was a lot of football on. So our Sundays, my other half covers local football, but his interest sadly doesn't stop there. So there's been a lot of football on, and he just turned to me and said, "Shall we get a takeaway pizza?" That doesn't happen very often. And then we discovered that our options were limited to like one company, because apparently we live too far away from everywhere. I didn't think we lived very far away at all. I want to live in the middle of nowhere. Like if I did live in the middle of nowhere, it would be okay that no one would Deliveroo to me. But anyway, so yeah, we got a veggie supreme takeaway pizza.
Yum. With a dash of football on the side. Anything to get you through the football.
Anything to get. Why do you think I knit so much?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, what am I going to ask you next? What would be your biggest distraction from a job you knew you had to do?
Oh, God. Well, I mean, if not knitting, biggest distraction. I mean, I am so capable of getting distracted. I spend way too much time on Instagram. My Instagram feed is just this, I've managed to curate, like the people I follow, people like you guys. I mean, just gorgeous photos of flowers and plants, puppies. I follow a lot of cute dogs, a lot of amazing knitwear. So yeah, it's just basically just this feed of inspiring gorgeousness, which I could get lost in for hours. So if I'm not knitting or like cuddling the dog, or looking at, I don't know, a plant list or something, it's probably just aimlessly gazing at Instagram.
It can take a lot of time.
It can
You
be a
look
time
up and
vampire.
go, oh my goodness, it's lunchtime already and I've done nothing.
Yep.
Right, last one. Tea or coffee?
Coffee every time.
Ew.
Straight down the line.
Exactly. No
Do
pause.
not have to think about that. I am fueled. If it could be intravenous, I think it would. I am, like, every morning I've got a little stovetop coffee thing. I used to have a much fancier machine, but it was always, I'd forget to descale it or whatever, and it would be sad. So now I just have a little stovetop thing, and it's quite a big one. So I make like a vat of really strong, smoky coffee first thing.
Sounds
And
good.
if I really need it, I make more later.
Nice.
I mean, Bridget will remember when I went to visit her, I don't even know how much coffee I drank. I probably drank all of your coffee.
Bridget drinks a lot of coffee.
I think we all do. I think you could say the four of us are coffee friends.
Yeah.
Friends of the coffee.
Yeah, 50% coffee
Strong,
bean.
good, strong coffee.
I liked your answers, Thordis. They were good answers.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you'd like to tell us? What's coming next down the track for Thordis before we
Who
let
knows?
you go?
Who knows? I mean, it's become one of those times when, I mean, I think in media you can't know anyway. I mean, hopefully I'll just I'm quite happy, really. I'm fairly content. I would like a bigger garden, and obviously I want a greenhouse. So my aspirations, as much as I love my current home, are probably, I've got half an eye on Rightmove. I'm sort of trying to figure out if I could maybe wangle a move to somewhere where I could have a bit more space. And
the knitting room as well.
And wool room, wall of wool, that'd be amazing. And a tree. I just desperately want to move somewhere that already has a tree in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some people around here are lucky enough to have trees. Our garden literally had a rosemary bush and like a tiny little area of a privet hedge. But I want a tree I want to plant trees, but I want a tree that's already got a story and is already, big and beautiful, or just little and beautiful. Just a tree. I'm not that fussy.
Just a tree.
What tree would it be? You know so many trees.
But just any tree. Honestly, I'm not fussy. I now, when I look at Rightmove, I scroll through. Obviously, I'm going to the garden. And then once I look at a garden, I think, oh, that's a good size. I'm like, right, what have they got any trees? Where are the trees?
I can't buy that house, they've got no trees.
It's not gone.
You're not worried about the number of bedrooms or whether there's a usable kitchen. It's just, has it got a tree?
Has it got a tree of any description, preferably one that isn't like cankering and dying?
Yeah, I was going to say they do drop bits onto the house, as we have found out, unfortunately. We've got a lot of sycamores above us, and one of them we've had to take down because it kept dropping large limbs on the house.
Yeah, I also don't want a tree that my other half is going to immediately want to take down. That would be very distressing. It's too dangerous to the house. It has to go. So yeah, I'm looking for a tree. I'm looking and if I happen to have to move into a house without a tree, I'm just going to go and buy. When you buy like £500 trees.
I can get you a tree.
I was going to say Lucy can help you with that.
I have a supplier who sells big trees.
Well, I may well need it. If I have to move to a house without a tree,
you can get a tree. Any tree you want.
She's good at moving big trees.
I've always taken trees for granted. I think it's just easy when you've always grown up. We never had massive gardens, but like our first house had a big apple tree. the house I spent the rest of my life growing up in had a big pear tree, a big apple tree, and lots of little trees that we put in. And I took for granted what a big tree is. It's a wonderful thing.
What happened to your tree that sort of cracked, Lucy? You had
well, we had to have the tree surgeon came round and put it was really interesting actually. He put like a whole scanner around the trunk of the tree and could scan inside to see what was going on. And sadly, half the tree inside is got this virus. I don't think it's COVID. It's a horrible virus though. And it's killing, you can see it's killing half the tree, but it's such an old tree. It's about 120 years of beech tree. So loath to take it down. So we took the bit that was dangerous. I'm about to drop on the husband's studio. I felt perhaps we should remove that limb, maybe. Certain death had fallen. So remove that. So we took that bit off, but the rest of it's still standing. And we're just hoping we get if we get another 5 years, if we get another 10 years, it'd be amazing. He'll probably have to come down at some point, but.
It's just wonderful. In the midst, when we got to a point where we could go out and do interviews in an easier way, like a socially distanced way, I went to King's College around about when they were harvesting their meadow. I don't know if you saw that they, instead of just green lawn on the backs by King's College Chapel, they planted up with a meadow and then they baled it and everything. And it's amazing. And I went to have a look at that. And then Steve Coghill, the head gardener there, took me on a little tour around. And I think it's a mulberry. They have the most amazing sprawling mulberry that's just sort of, it's like an octopus.
Yeah.
Just old trees. They are absolutely
all the stories to tell.
Yeah,
you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely amazing.
We've got a little tree. I will be quick time-wise. So at our family home, we had what we used to call the dead apple tree. So my brother and I planted an apple pip, like you do when you're tiny. And this tree grew into the most sickly, unhealthy, tiny little tree. But it flowered every year, and it became this sort of topic of conversation all the time. So
how tall was it? How big was it?
Well, I think they did cut it. So, but it was about 6 foot, 8 foot.
So it was a proper tree.
Oh, it was a proper tree, an absolute proper tree.
Right.
But the apples weren't edible, because when you do it from a pit, they just weren't edible. It was horrible. We used to give them to horses and things. So after Mum died, my stepdad, they had a problem with a drainage issue at home, and he wanted to take the tree out. And I was like, you can't take the tree out. It was like taking part of my soul, this tree. Anyway, so cut a very long story short, I decided to try and dig it up and move it. And I thought, well, it's going to die because I would say it must be about 50 years old now. That's giving away how old I am. And, it's never going to survive. It's been rocking. It's been really unhealthy. And he dug it up and left it outside his house, roots completely exposed for about 3 days. So I'm like, this poor tree.
What
Shoved
time
it
of
in the
year?
back of the van. Completely the wrong time, completely the wrong time. Shoved it in the back of the van, planted it. And I thought, well, when it dies, I'm just going to grow a beautiful clematis or something up it. Anyway, it's absolutely thrived, and it's growing massive. It's blossomed, it's fruited, it's done everything, and it's this most happy little tree. It's probably like, oh, thank the Lord. So it survived. It survived. So we've got this really sort of emotional tree growing in the garden. So.
Yeah.
You could start one off in a pot, Thordis, and then when you find your happy home that will already have a tree, you just bring another one in.
Well, yeah, I did. I said to Alan, I was beginning to think I might just start growing trees from seed, because he keeps talking about these like amazing Wellingtonias and things that he's growing from seed. And then he said, you're going to have to get it in the ground after about 2 yees, which maybe is a good deadline for moving.
We've got to move. There's a tree I've got to plant.
Yeah, I've got about 5 trees that need to go in the ground. So
buy the house.
With a big garden.
Yeah. Well, I hope you find that place.
Yes, I'm sure you will.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Been
You've been
lovely.
amazing.
Thank you.
Well, I've talked a lot. There's a whole edit for you there.
They're the best guests, the ones that talk.
Well, thank you. I don't get to talk about my knitting to a receptive audience very often. The other half who's currently working in the kitchen, has to put up with a lot of me going, oh, look at this amazing pattern, oh, look at this amazing stitch, look at this colour combo.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think this is a good colour combo? I mean, literally with this colour here, I was like, do you think like the peach and the teal go together? And he just looks sort of blankly at it. Like, I don't know.
I have a husband like that.
So a receptive audience to let me run on about knitting and yarn is joyful.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for giving up your very busy morning.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank
It's
you.
been a treat. It's put a smile on my face.
Oh,
Oh.
And thank Lily as well.
Oh, I will.
yes.
She's sprawled
For her
out on the
little
sofa
cameo
like
spot.
she's had a really hard day.
Yeah.
Just waiting for you to peel her a grape.
Yeah. Fan her.
Oh, lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you, and good luck with this fabulous podcast.
Thank you
so much.
You've been listening to the Restless Creatives podcast. To ensure you don't miss our next episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Restless Creatives podcast. If you would prefer to listen rather than watch us, you can catch us on your favoured podcast provider.